So as you finish your sketch in your sketchbook for your oil pastel portrait, I would say start to pin down your color scheme before you start with oil pastel on your final paper. So big reminder I want to give you is regardless of what color scheme you pick out, make sure that you are including black and white. You're going to be thinking of not just those colors on their own, but also thinking of the tints, tones, shades of those colors. So regardless of color scheme that you're using, when you select those colors, also include that black and white so that you're including those different shades and you can incorporate those as you go through and as you start to blend and add depth and form to your portrait. One thing to note about warm cool is typically with these you're going to see a little bit more implication as far as color temperature. So usually with warm cool color scheme you're going to see your closer items, your highlighted items lean more towards those warm colors, and then those areas that are either further in the background or in shadow are going to lean more towards those cool tones. That's going to allow you to establish a little bit easier visual depth within your piece. And then as you start with the project itself, something that can be helpful is I would say avoid using black right at the beginning. Save that when you get into your blending and shading. But what can be really helpful is as you get started, start off with light pressure, starting to block out kind of like your base colors for everything. This can be helpful, especially if you are working with an altered color scheme, to kind of figure out where everything is being placed, what those color schemes are, so that then as you build up those layers of oil pastel and as you build up those different shades, you have more information already down on the paper. And it's also going to help with that blending and shading and allow you to get that more gradual transition between your colors. And then depending on color scheme that you're using, or depending on the reference photo that you're looking at, it can be helpful, especially when working with those altered color schemes, to think on your colors in relationship to value. So I'm starting to look at where do I see those shadows within my portrait, identifying those and then getting those darker colors in those areas, and then switching over into kind of my mid-tone colors and then moving closer and closer into my highlights. This can be particularly helpful, especially if you are doing altered color schemes, since it allows you to kind of consider kind of just the natural tonality of the oil pastel colors themselves, and then thinking of, as you blend up, how you can then alter and just stylize those a little bit more effectively. Otherwise, once I have that initially blocked out, I'm going to keep most of my really light areas, just the white of the paper for now, since I'll blend those out more with the white oil pastel. And then as I'm building in just those different shades, I'm going to be looking at how I can use those different techniques to build up those color ranges, either looking at oil blending, looking at the heavy pressure blending, scumbling, stippling. All of those can be really good options for this and are going to be depending on the overall kind of texture that you want, the overall appearance. Some of those can be better suited than the others. Typically, scumbling is really nice when you are working with areas that you want to be a little bit more smooth. When you tighten up those circles, it's going to give you really soft, gradual, and transitional shades and blending. Heavy pressure blending can also be very smooth. You do have to be a little bit more thoughtful if you do want kind of smooth, very non-directional shading on your line direction and line kind of line length as you're putting down marks. And then as you continue to build up your shades, I would say just continue to look at your reference, see where you are kind of identifying those key tones, those key shades, and then it'll be pretty similar process as you start to go through. And then one thing to note, if you are doing sgraffito, what I would recommend is putting down kind of a nice heavy base layer first, thinking of that color that you're seeing underneath. Let that dry for a day, and then when we come back that next class period, then go over with that second color. This will make the color underneath a little bit more visual striking, since it has some time to dry, and it'll make it less likely where these two colors are going to mix together and you're not going to see as much of that effect. So I would say if you are doing any of that sgraffito work, it can be helpful to leave that base layer that first day. And then it can also be a nice option, especially when you do get to those finer details. And then one other thing I do want to note is you'll notice here when I started to get into detailing, Oil pastels themselves are notoriously challenging to detail with just because they are fairly blunt-ended. Couple of methods that can be helpful as you work through is to either grab a piece of scrap paper, kind of draw down and file down one of those sides a little bit so that you get a nice tapered edge that you can use more like a pencil. You can also unwrap the bottom edge and then use that side too. And then sgraffito can also be a nice option, especially where you do want areas that are more kind of drawn detailing, and then kind of being mindful of application, thinking about which colors you're drawing away, which ones do you want to see underneath. And then last note for you, just as you get started, I would say make your portrait nice and large if you haven't yet. Makes it a lot easier, so then when you do go into that detailing work, you're not fighting the size of the paper, the size of those details as much, and makes it a lot easier for you as you start to get into that finalization and that polishing later on. But that should be everything. Let me know if you have questions, but you should be good to go.